Alright, this is Randomness, and we're playing a really, really shitty version of Monopoly. Alright, let's see what we can do here. I don't even know how to roll the dice. I'm pretty sure it should only break once someone lands on, I think, go to jail, something like that. I remember that something breaks the game, and it's High's turn, so if High doesn't show up, then we're just gonna have to forfeit here. I don't know if there's a timing limit on the moves, which obviously there should be, but you don't know. You really don't know. Alright, well, I know we're probably not going to actually get to play the game, but I still want to go over the strategies, some general remarks about strategy in Monopoly, because yes, this is a game where you can win or lose based on strategy. Believe it or not, it's not random. It really isn't. You can get pretty nitty-gritty complicated with this game. The one thing this doesn't have that makes any game as simple as it could possibly be in terms of interactions complicated is enemy prediction. Because you're rolling the dice randomly and you can't control whether you land on a certain spot or not, everything is dictated by randomness and therefore by like the laws of large numbers, right? Like if you play enough games, then certain strategies will get you the highest win percentages, right? And then the only other thing that might be somewhat relevant besides win percent is variance, right? Obviously, if you know you can win a game, if it's just variance is like it depends on how much you need to win. Like let's say if you know that certain games are very important, you might want to have a very consistent win rate that's slightly higher. Where you don't get in large losing streaks, which would get you to bankrupt if you were playing for actual money. Like in poker, that can be a thing, right? Where variance is something, if you could reduce it, then essentially the chances of going on large losing streaks are smaller. And therefore the disadvantage of the fact that once you hit zero, you can never go back is sort of mitigated slightly, right? These are just some considerations. But in a game where you can't do that, you can't predict your opponent, yeah, that's pretty much all there's to it, right? Picking good strategies, then sometimes they have to have low variance. Those are the two things that you can say. When you do something like rock, paper, scissors, even though it's super simple, that game instantly is something that you could do at a professional level, right? You could always get better at it your entire life. The reason for that is that in a game like rock, paper, scissors, you have to predict your opponent, and therefore you have to read into your opponent's patterns, right? And this is pretty much infinitely complicated. Like there's no limit to how good you could be at that. And really, yeah, what can I say? With something, so most games have an element of rock, paper, scissors in it, right? Where it's like, if I do this strategy, then you do this one, blah, 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 blah. And then usually there's also some factors that make one option objectively better than the others, like, which means that you'll still have to randomize, but you'll do like one of the options 50% and the other two 25%, just as an example, right? Instead of distributing them all equally. And that's something like, it might happen in, let's just take an example. It might happen in soccer, right? Like where you have to either go, break out to the right or to the left, and you have to just kind of randomize it. Or with penalties, right? You do the same thing, and it very quickly becomes that game where if you know your opponent is reading you, right, and you mostly play to the left, right? You mostly shoot a penalty to the left. You know that he should probably try to predict it and go to the left. But what that opponent really should do to actually be like a proper game theorist in a sense, right? To actually properly play the game, what you would need to do is kind of flip a few coins and just if you get like, let's say you want 70% to the left and 30% to the right. That's how you want to distribute the odds. What you can do is you just flip 10 coins, and if 7 or more turn up heads, you actually go to the unintuitive corner, right? Like you actually dodge to the right instead of to the left. That makes it impossible for someone to predict you, right? That just makes it game theoretically sound, and you should just... The only thing you can do at that point is... well, you can obviously still go to the right. So you could still read your opponent, it's just less effective, randomize your strategies, right? And what happens is there's no real limit to where you should stop reading into it, right? It's just like the problem is, where do you stop, right? Where do you stop with this game? Where do you then predict that someone else is going to the right because they think you'll read into it and like go to the left, and then you could go to the left instead, and then they're like, I know you're gonna do that, so I'm gonna go to the left. It's like I really don't know how you could ever approach that. How if that's a solvable problem, right? It really seems like there's no time limit. All right, message to the Monopoly devs: you should probably have a timer. Oh wait, what? Oh, really? It appears that instead I just froze my monitor. Okay. Wow, really? Really? I just froze my monitor. Wow. Alright. Well. So I just want to finish my point here. I'll just wrap it up. So, one thing that could happen is that, let's say you pretend to be a dummy, right? And someone knows that you're not an intelligent actor in a sense, right? So he reads into you, and then suddenly, one moment, you change it. You could get a huge advantage for one particular moment, right? And I really don't know if it's a solvable problem where you can know if someone is really dumb or really just playing it or whatever, right? Like, I don't see the solution to it. I don't see how you could solve that. I can see how you can do predictions on people. I can see how you can read a pattern, right? If someone's like, so just as an example of something that you can read, that you can solve. Let's say you let people do random heads or tails, and like heads, 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 tails, heads, tails, 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 heads, tails, heads, tails, 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 heads, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, 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 tails, tails, heads, tails, 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 heads, heads, tails, heads, 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 tails, heads, 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 tails, 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 heads, heads, tails, 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 heads, heads, something like that. Now this is pseudo-random, and there will be certain patterns in this, right? Oh, fuck. Alright. First of all, heads, tails, generator. Let's see what a random coin flipper does. Right, obviously it's still pseudo-randoms, but it's close enough. American voting coin? Okay, that just seems wrong. Flip. Let's see, let's flip 50 of them. It's expensive to generate randomness. Let's be a little conservative here, right? Oh, okay. For a second I thought these were all ones. But yeah. So this is reverse and obverse. What? So this is heads and this is tails, I presume, right? So heads, 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 tails, tails, heads, heads, tails, heads, 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 heads. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a row, right? Quite early on. Do I ever have 6 in here? No, I don't. Let's see. Heads, 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 heads. That's another one. Is that the same one, actually? Because that's... Here's 5 tails. Here's 6 heads. Here's 4 tails. Look at the average streaks here. 4 tails, 4 tails. Doesn't really matter which one it is, right? But 6 heads, 5 tails. It's like... So, if you compare that to this, right? It's much, much less flipping back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? So what humans tend to do, and what I tried to actually counter but didn't do sufficiently, is actually sort of have this intuition to flip it to the other side of the coin, even though it should be random, once you have a couple of heads in a row, or tails in a row, one of the options that you have, right? So we do tails, 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 and then we're like, well, that's 3 of them, let's now do heads, right? That's kind of how how we generate randomness, and that's why it's so distinct from actual randomness. And you'd actually have to do very well to try and simulate this kind of randomness. Like, imagine that you're shooting left or right in a corner. You would feel stupid to do this 6 times to the left in a row, right? You would really not feel like doing that. Like, imagine going to the left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left, left, left. It doesn't feel random at all when you're in the streak, but it still is, right? And once you see how devious randomness is, and how different it is from our perceived version of randomness, you start to understand a couple of things. You start to understand why you can read into people, right? Because people that generate this kind of thing, you know, after 3 times, if they go to the left 3 times, you know they're probably going to the right, like 80% of the time or more. And even beyond that, you can understand a bit of psychology, right? You can understand how pure randomness can appear to have such solid patterns to some people, and other people are like, no, that's bullshit, right? So if you show the same phenomenon to 2 people, and they have 50 of these coin flips, and another one has the same 50, one might see heads, 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 tails, heads, 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 tails, and go like, this is completely rigged to heads, right? And the other person might see tails, 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 heads. You have to appreciate why we're so delusional about certain things, right? When that's how randomness functions, where it's like completely against our intuition and it seems to have patterns in it, right? We seek too many patterns in everything that we do. We see patterns where there are none, right? And that's one of the core components. It's beneficial in terms of evolution to make too many observations of this kind rather than too few, right? The cost of a good example of this is, I think Richard Dawkins mentioned this, where imagine that you stayed away from foxes and dangerous shrooms, but you also stayed away from some innocent herbs, innocent plants, whatever, right? So you're missing out on a little bit of food, maybe, right? Maybe. All right. But you're not in danger. You're safely hiding away from all the dangerous stuff in there. And now compare that to someone else who sees too few patterns, who stays away from the dangerous shrooms, who knows that he can actually eat the herbs, right? He's not an idiot, but he misses one pattern. He misses out on, oh right, foxes can actually kill me or whatever, right? This is just an example, right? And he just misses out on one of those things. Or, oh, those shrooms are edible. Whoops, I made a mistake. Suddenly you're dead. You didn't just get a little bit less food. You died, right? So the evolutionary advantage of being paranoid in a sense and seeking too many patterns, right, is obvious once you start thinking about these things in these hypothetical situations, right? So that's one of the factors that go into reading into opponents, and even just underlying to that, like why we see patterns when there are none, right? I think those are 2 very interesting topics. I hope you feel the same way, and maybe you learn something. This is something to think about whenever you play almost any kind of game, whether it's a shooter or a MOBA or soccer. There's movement prediction going on everywhere. And now you know a little bit more about how you can do that, right? When someone goes to the left 3 times, either observe if they're always going to the left or whether they always shift after 3 times because they're trying to randomize, but they're human, so they're randomizing poorly. Those are 2 things that you can use in your games, and hopefully that's a little bit useful to you guys. And I will see you in the next one.